Let's get right into it. Number 9, the 2-month bread ban. We literally use it as the benchmark for all human innovation. If a new invention is amazing, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But for a brief window in American history, selling a pre-cut loaf of wheat was a federal offense. Sliced bread hit the shelves in 1928, and the country instantly fell in love. But in January 1943, right in the middle of World War II, U.S. Food Administrator Claude Wickard decided it was an unpatriotic luxury. He made commercial sliced bread completely illegal. The government's logic was that pre-sliced loaves required thicker wax paper to keep them fresh, and the heavy commercial slicing machines were wasting valuable steel. It was the 1940s equivalent of the government suddenly banning pre-ground coffee. The American public absolutely lost their minds. Bakeries panicked and housewives revolted. One angry mother famously wrote a scathing letter to the New York Times, complaining that her husband and children were suffering through clumsily hacked-up breakfast sandwiches. The national meltdown was so intense and so immediate that the War Foods Administration just threw their hands up and caved. Exactly 2 months after the law went into effect, the ban was quietly lifted. As it turns out, pure convenience is the one thing people simply refuse to sacrifice. Number 8. The outlawed bowling alleys. Travel back to medieval England for a moment. Picture yourself rolling a heavy wooden ball across the grass, trying to knock over some pins. It is the perfect way to spend a weekend. Until the King's Guards show up and arrest you for threatening national security. In 1366, King Edward III looked at his kingdom and saw a terrifying crisis. It was not an invading army or a deadly plague, it was lawn bowling. The game had become so wildly popular among the English working class that they were doing it all the time. So the king made it completely illegal for them to play. The problem was the English military. Their entire defense strategy relied on the longbow, which meant every able-bodied peasant was required by law to practice archery constantly. But instead of shooting arrows, the citizens were spending all their free time rolling balls at pins and gambling. The Crown genuinely believed this casual game was going to destroy the country. It would be exactly like the modern government outlawing video games because military recruitment numbers were too low. The panic was so intense that decades later, King Henry VIII actually reissued the ban, keeping the games strictly for the wealthy. But the public just ignored the royal decrees and kept playing in secret anyway. Today, bowling is a massive global family activity, and thankfully, bringing a deadly weapon to the alley is no longer required. Number 7. The devil's silverware. Take a look inside your kitchen drawer right now. Sitting right there next to the spoons is an object that the Catholic Church once considered an instrument of pure evil. For hundreds of years, eating your dinner with a fork was condemned by the clergy as a grave insult to God. The hysteria started back in the 11th century. A Byzantine princess married into Venice, and during royal banquets, she used a small, two-pronged golden fork to eat her food. The local religious leaders absolutely lost their minds. The strict theological argument was that God had already perfectly designed natural forks for humans to use, our fingers. Choosing to lift food with an artificial metal tool instead was seen as an act of extreme arrogance, vanity, and a direct rejection of divine design. The backlash was completely ruthless. When the princess tragically died of the plague shortly after arriving, a prominent cleric named St. Peter Damian literally preached that her agonizing death was God's direct punishment for her sinful eating utensils. Because of that religious terror, the fork was heavily stigmatized as a demonic and unmanly luxury across polite European society for centuries. Now, the ultimate irony is that eating with your hands at a fancy restaurant is exactly what gets you condemned. Number 6. The Pinball Prohibition. It sounds exactly like a scene from a 1940s mob movie. Police officers kick down the door of a shady underground joint, drag the illegal contraband out into the street, smash it to pieces with sledgehammers, and dump the wreckage into the Hudson River. But they weren't busting a bootlegging ring. They were destroying pinball machines. In 1942, New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia declared an all-out war on the arcade staple. Because early versions of the machines didn't actually have flippers yet, they relied mostly on luck, and players frequently bet money on the outcome. LaGuardia viewed them as a mob-run gambling menace explicitly designed to rob innocent schoolchildren of their lunch pennies. It was basically like a modern mayor outlawing claw machines just because they take your quarters. For over 3 decades, playing pinball in major cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles was treated as an actual crime. The bizarre 34-year prohibition lasted all the way until 1976, when a 26-year-old named Roger Sharp walked into a city council hearing to clear the game's name. Standing in front of skeptical lawmakers, he called his exact shot, pulled the plunger, and hit his target flawlessly. In one single move, he proved that physics and reflexes beat random chance, lifting the ban and saving the multi-billion-dollar arcade industry. Number 5. The riotous game of football today. Football is the most organized, heavily regulated, and beloved sport on the planet. But if you tried to play it in medieval London, you wouldn't just get a yellow card. You would go straight to prison. Before modern rules existed, the game was known as mob football. It was essentially two massive crowds of hundreds of people violently fighting over an inflated pig's bladder across an entire town. It was basically a giant street brawl masquerading as a casual pastime. It was so destructive that in 1314, King Edward II officially banned the game in London. The royal decree specifically cited the deafening uproar and the constant damage to the city caused by the giant tumbling crowds. Matches routinely left local businesses wrecked and players with shattered bones, making the game a literal threat to public safety, but the English public simply refused to give it up. Subsequent kings kept having to reissue the exact same ban because the sheer willpower of the people completely overwhelmed the monarchy's threats. Eventually, the authorities gave in and added rules to civilize the chaos. Today, the riotous game that kings desperately tried to outlaw has billions of fans and voluntarily shuts down entire countries. Number 4. The illegal swimsuit. Imagine walking onto a crowded beach on a hot summer afternoon. Instead of lifeguards scanning the water, you see police officers actively patrolling the sand holding tape measures. They are physically measuring women's clothing, and if a swimsuit exposes too much skin, the wearer is immediately fined or hauled away in a police cruiser. When French engineer Louis Réard invented the bikini in 1946, he deliberately named it after the Bikini Atoll nuclear tests because he knew the cultural reaction would be explosive. He was right. The garment triggered an absolute global moral panic. The Vatican officially condemned the swimsuit as inherently sinful. Almost immediately, local governments in Italy, Spain, Australia, and coastal cities across the United States passed strict ordinances making the bikini completely illegal. Authorities literally tried to legislate women's bodies based purely on a few inches of missing fabric. But the public pushback was relentless. Aided by movie stars like Brigitte Bardot, who famously wore them in open defiance of the stigma, the sheer volume of women adopting the style eventually overwhelmed the local police departments. Today, the exact garment that used to get you arrested on the beach is the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Number 3. Betting on death. Today, buying a life insurance policy is the ultimate responsible adult decision. It is how you make sure your family doesn't lose the house if something terrible happens to you. But in the 17th century, the authorities viewed that exact same financial safety net as a deeply immoral, highly illegal crime. In 1681, France passed the famous Ordinance of Marine, which outlawed the practice entirely. The ruling class looked at the basic mechanism of life insurance, paying a premium to receive money upon a death, and declared it a sick form of gambling. The theological argument was that putting a literal monetary price tag on a human soul was a deeply offensive violation of nature. But the legal argument was even darker. The authorities were terrified of the moral hazard. They genuinely believed that if you gave people the opportunity to get rich off a relative's death, murder rates across the country would absolutely skyrocket. They considered the entire industry an odious speculation. But as global trade rapidly expanded, the system realized that the massive financial ruin of widows and orphans was a much bigger, more immediate crisis than hypothetical murders. Eventually, the governments caved because they desperately needed the economic stability. The very practice that was once banned as a direct incentive for murder is now a $3 trillion pillar of the modern financial world. Number 2. The banned board game. We think of chess as the ultimate test of human intellect. We actively teach it to children to make them smarter. But if you pulled out a chessboard in the 13th century, you were engaging in a sinful, illegal vice. In 1254, King Louis IX of France issued a strict royal edict outlawing the game entirely. The problem wasn't the strategy, it was the reputation. Before modern tournaments formalized the rules, early versions of chess sometimes involved rolling dice to determine the next move. That single detail completely ruined its public image. The Catholic Church lumped it right in with other games of chance, heavily associating it with gambling, dark taverns, and general idleness. Priests were strictly forbidden from playing it, and the king publicly condemned the entire game as a useless and boring activity that corrupted public morality. It was basically like a modern government banning Sudoku because people were betting on the numbers. But the decree failed almost instantly. Knights, wealthy nobles, and merchants simply loved the game too much to care about the edict. They ignored the king, kept playing behind closed doors, and quietly outlasted the moral panic. The exact activity they called a sinful waste of time survived to become the global symbol of sheer brainpower. Number 1. The war on home videotaping a show or downloading a movie is the foundation of modern entertainment. But in the 1970s, Hollywood executives looked at the very first home video recorders and saw an existential threat, launching a massive legal war to make the machines illegal. In 1976, Universal Studios sued Sony, demanding the VCR be outlawed for mass copyright infringement. Executives were terrified that if people could record television, they'd skip commercials and stop buying movie tickets. The panic reached such a hysterical level that the head of the Motion Picture Association famously testified to Congress that the VCR was to the American film industry as the Boston Strangler is to the woman home alone. It was a ruthless attempt to ban a new technology just because it disrupted an old business model. The bitter legal battle dragged on for 8 years, finally landing at the U.S. Supreme Court in 1984. By a razor-thin 5-4 decision, the justices ruled that recording a show to watch later was perfectly legal under fair use. That single vote saved on-demand media. In the ultimate irony, the machine Hollywood tried to kill ended up creating the home video market, making them billions.